The Sonic Rider series has always been a personal favorite spin-off of mine, except you. With it being a super original racing game for Sonic which featured hoverboards known as extreme gearboards in the game, as well as ancient gravity manipulating rocks known as the Arc of the Cosmos as seen in Zero Gravity. These two features really made a racing game that just screamed Sonic from head to toe. Sonic has always been cool and had a very confident side of him, and throwing him into a futuristic hoverboard was just a whole new level of Sonic being cool. But one of the more story-orientated parts of the Rider series has to be the Babylon Rogues, with a pretty deep tie to ancient history in the Sonic universe. While on the surface, most people know of the characters known as Jet the Hawk, Wave the Swallow, and Storm the Albatross, and bits and pieces of the Babylon Garden, I thought with the upcoming release of Sonic Racing Cross Worlds and the three of those characters making their long-awaited return, let's take a deeper dive into what ancient Babylon and the Babylon Rogues are all about. But of course, we must start where it all began, in ancient Babylon. The ancient Babylonians are an ancient alien civilization that are described to appear to look like genies, which I can imagine look very similar to the Babylon Guardian that we see at the end of the first Riders game. But they were space travelers aboard a ship known as the Astro Babylon, which is later known as Babylon Garden. But the Babylonians are also the creators of the Arc of the Cosmos, their main source of power to fly through space, but is also the main reason on why the Babylonians got stranded on Earth, as they were never able to control the full power of the Arc of the Cosmos. With all 5 of the Arc of the Cosmos disappearing around Earth's orbit and all of them falling to Earth at different times in history, the Babylonians waited for the Arc of the Cosmos to come falling back down to Earth, so they could once again go back home to their home planet. But all of the Arc of the Cosmos fall down to Earth at different times, as they do not attract each other besides the Master Arc. The Master Arc of the Cosmos, as we learn in Zero Gravity, is going to be one that allows all of the Arc of the Cosmos to fall down into Earth. The ancient Babylonians waited for the Master Arc to fall, but yet that never happened. But in the meantime of patiently waiting for the Master Arc and the rest of the Arc of the Cosmos to fall down, the ancient Babylonians ended up building a city on top of their astral Babylon, which was named to Babylon Garden. And along with building it, they were able to find some technology that allowed the island to float. But unfortunately for the ancient Babylonians, the Master Arc doesn't fall until the events of Zero Gravity. And the ancient Babylonians were only ever able to recover 2 of the 5 arcs. But the ancient Babylonians decided to store those away inside of Gigan Rocks and Crimson Crater, 2 tracks that you race in Zero Gravity. But within time, as civilizations do, their people changed. They grew more accustomed to Earth and calling it more of their home, with still hopes to go to their home planet someday once the arcs fall. But the Babylonians ended up getting quite a reputation for being thieves, then being changed to the name of Babylon Rogues. This was actually how they were able to obtain the 2 arcs that ended up falling to Earth, as they actually stole them from the people that originally found the Arc of the Cosmos. These were obviously stored away at a different time, but originally somebody else found them and the Babylonians ended up stealing them, being named the Babylon Rogues since then. But they also began to build the prototypes of the extreme gearboard, serving a purpose of helping the birds fly easier. But the prototype is later sealed away in the garden and is protected by the Babylon Guardian. We also see this exact same Guardian at the end of the Babylon Rogue story in the first game, the same one that we mentioned earlier on in this video. But it is said that the ancient Babylonians gave a boy a gift of angel wings, which is heavily speculated what causes the events of the Wrath of the Gods in burying Babylon Garden, which would cause the Babylonians to be homeless and forced to be scattered around the world. But with being scattered around the world, they would lose their advanced technology and were forced to live like everyone else on Earth. It's believed that over time, Babylonians started to fade out, and as years went by, the more and more Babylonians were erased, leaving very few to exist and know the stories of ancient Babylon. Fast forwarding a bit, where eventually the keys of Babylon were passed down to Jet's father, who we only ever see in a picture inside of Jet the Hawk's office. But fast forwarding to modern times, the keys were then passed down to the current leader of the Babylon Rogues, his son, Jet the Hawk. Now into the events of the first installment in Sonic Riders. The first game's story goes that Eggman gained interest in Babylon Garden and its treasures. But with Jet being the only one to have a key, Eggman needs to trick not only the Rogues, but also Team Sonic into entering the World Grand Prix, where you need a Chaos Emerald to enter the World Grand Prix. And the reason being that Jet might have the key to Babylon Garden, but he has no idea how to activate it, or where to find the whereabouts of Babylon Garden. And of course, like most things in the Sonic universe, you of course need the 7 Chaos Emeralds and the Babylon Key. So with that being said, the Rogues and Team Sonic face off in a winner-takes-all in Sand Ruins, with Wave planting a bomb on Sonic's extreme gearboard, allowing Jet to win the race. And now with Jet activating the key with the emeralds, Babylon Garden rises up and begins to float once again. But with Jet being in awe, Eggman snatches the key from Jet's hand and bolts off to find the treasure. But of course, it wouldn't be a Sonic game if Sonic didn't stop Eggman from doing so. So Sonic gets the key but gives it back to Jet, having no interest in the treasure of Babylon. So now with Jet and his team having the Babylon key, they go inside to take the treasure. But as they enter, Sonic and the others hear the roar of the Babylon Guardian, where they run in to help the Babylon rogues and fight him and, well, kill him. Yeah, it's kinda crazy to think that Sonic and the others killed the last remaining member of the ancient Babylonian civilization, but maybe the Guardian was hoping that somebody would finally claim the treasure so he could finally rest after all this time. But what they find for the treasure is pretty useless to them, as it's the first extreme gear board in a flying carpet. Sonic and Jet are then held at gunpoint by Eggman. No, like really, Eggman actually pulls out dually pistols, but then throw the rug at him, and of course Eggman has no use for this either. It's cool that they give you the option to ride this as a playable board inside the game after beating the story, but considering that the Extreme Gear board technology has come so far and Wave and Tails pump these boards out like nothing, this chunk of a rug actually serves no other purpose inside of any story of the Riders series and is just meant for us players to enjoy as an Extreme Gear board in the game. But that's it for the first game's story. But moving into Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, where the Ark of the Cosmos are finally introduced, where the rest of the Ark of the Cosmos fall down to Earth. We see two right away, where one is collected by SCR HD, an Eggman robot, and the other by Tails, where it is then given to Sonic. But we learn that SCR HD goes on a rampage due to an unknown program inside of the Ark of the Cosmos, where he looks to collect all 5 Arks and then bring them back to Babylon Garden. And then there's the Babylon Rogues, who want all of them as well. Why, you ask? To become the fastest extreme gear riders in the world. What a great purpose for these ancient Babylonian artifacts. But anyways, eventually with all 5 being in the same room, similar to the first game, Sonic just gives the remaining Arks to Jet. So now the Babylon Rogues have all of them. And with all 5 being in the same place, this awakens Babylon Guardian once again, where then a beaten up SCR HD backhands Wave and takes all of the Ark of the Cosmos back to Babylon Garden, activating a huge black hole looking to destroy the world. And this is also where SCR HD transforms into the final boss of the game, known as Master Core Abyss. And in this transformation, he gains the power to control gravity, as he consumed all of the Ark of the Cosmos. But Team Sonic and the Babylon Rogues team up to fight him and stop the black hole. And as they are able to stop Master Core Abyss, this restores Babylon Garden. But in the process, this also means that the Ark of the Cosmos are lost forever, and Babylon Garden can never fly into space again like it did in ancient times. But when Wave questions Jet if this is okay now that they can't go back to their home planet, he says,
"So are you okay with all this?"
Well, much as I'll miss the vastness of space, this world still has its charm.
While I've always found the ancient Babylon story really interesting, and have always been curious about what their home planet was like, I think it's a really big thing for Jet to acknowledge that the remaining Babylonians call Earth their home, and also showing that sometimes moving on from the past is the right decision. And then there's Sonic Freeriders. And I'm not going to touch on Freeriders, as yes, I do hate the gameplay of the game, but the story actually does nothing for the characters of the Babylon Rogues, or anything about the past of Babylon. And to be honest, it's just a bad characterization of the characters that seem to be taking steps backwards when it comes to their character development, so we'll skip Freeriders. One thing that I do want to slightly touch on is the Archie Comics, where Jet and the Babylon Rogues are quite different, as the lore that we talked about previously and the story from the games are non-existent in the Archie Comics. But keep in mind, this is pre-Genesis Wave, so everything is pretty original and it doesn't strictly follow the games, and that usually can mean something really interesting is going to happen or an absolute mess that just doesn't make any sense. But the Babylonians were written quite oddly, but I suppose it could make sense, but don't take it too seriously. But Jet in the comics was never given the title of the leader of the Babylon Rogues, or given any key to the Babylon Garden, but instead in the Archie Comics is a part of a group called the Battlebird Armada, a group of birds who were all Babylonian and basically making majority of the birds in the universe have Babylonian lineage. Where originally most of the Battlebird Armada is antagonists from a spin-off game in Tails' Adventure, but it also appears that the Armada holds most of the extreme gear in the comics as well. Which makes sense, as this does line up a bit with what ancient Babylon was trying to create, but this also brings in some familiar characters like Bean the Dynamite, who you might know from Sonic the Fighters now has a connection to the Babylonians in the comics, and even having a pretty one-sided relationship with Jet the Hawk, where Jet has no interest in Bean, even revealing that Jet's whole name is allegedly Jetson Q Hawkington. I highly doubt this is canon by any means, but it's an interesting addition to Jet's character. But it's never specifically stated that Bean is Babylonian inside of the Archie comics, but it is heavily implied that he could potentially have it, as it seems like most of the birds in the Archie comics do have some type of Babylonian lineage. But I guess it's hard to say, as we'll never know. But while Jet is a member of the Battlebird Armada, this doesn't last long. As the leader of the Armada expresses, with the help of Jet he would be able to find Babylon Garden and awaken it, allowing him to rule the world. And while Jet does have interest in finding Babylon Garden, he has no ambitions to rule the world. He then declines the offer, and this obviously pisses off the leader of the Armada, and then he throws Jet in prison, where he meets his fellow cellmates in Wave and Storm, who break out, forming a group naming themselves the Babylon Rogues. As we can see, quite a bit different from Riders. They even later gain a fourth member named Predator Hawk, who the Babylon Rogues ended up freeing from prison and having a very similar look to Jet. But ultimately they have a huge disagreement with them, saying that Jet is not fit to be a leader, which would lead to them having a fourth member for not very long, as Predator leaves to join up with Mammoth Mogul. While this is all vastly different from what we know with the Babylonians in the Riders games, I don't mind a different take on the Babylon Rogues, as Jet has a lot more build up as a character in this, in what feels like a bigger purpose and a bigger reason for him to find Babylon Garden than just Eggman saying that he wants the treasure in it. And Jet even tries to go after Babylon Garden later on in the comics. There obviously isn't a huge backstory to any of them in the game, and the Babylonian history can be really confusing in the games, where you feel as if you hear what they're saying but just assume that you understand, as a lot of the history in the Riders games can just easily fly over your head. There's definitely times where you really feel like that one Knuckles cutscene in the first Riders game. The Archie Comics make not only the world feel full of characters, but also characters with a bunch of different lineages that make you want to learn more about these characters. And while the early days of Archie pre-Genesis Wave can be a bit crazy or even bad at times, I really like the attempt at making Babylonians seem bigger and thriving more than we ever could think in Riders. And I appreciate the work that went into trying to make something original for them, and have more of a deep lore within Archie. But the Archie comics are not the only comics that feature the Babylon Rogues, as they also are featured inside of the IDW Comics as well. While I'm not going to get into all of the nitty-gritty of the IDW Comics, as they are very much side characters, as within recent years of the games, the Rogues only ever appear in the Riders games, and are never in anything else besides some spin-offs like Mario and Sonic in the two-player mode of Black Knight. That's also only Jet, and not Wave and Storm, making them feel as if they were held back by being Riders exclusive characters. And while they're being added to Cross Worlds, that is still a racing game, but is a step in the right direction. But IDW actually makes them feel as if they're part of the main group of side characters, similar to the Chaotix, where while they might not always be around, they're there when Sonic and the others need help or in a side story. And I love that. I've always felt that the Rogues are so much more than just Rider exclusive characters. And even within the Metal Virus, we really see them come in clutch and help out, but also giving us what's arguably the best moment in the team's history, where it looks like they might be backed into a corner with the Zombots. Jet reassures just how much he believes in his team by saying, "Didn't you hear me tell that geezer? The Babylon Rogues don't lose. That means all of us." While at times Jet might come off as selfish or self-centered, it shows that deep down he believes in the Rogues and shows just how much trust he puts in them with his life. It's also a huge bonus that they brought out their weapons that they use in the original Riders game, like Jet's fans or Wave's big wrench, and of course the extreme gearboards. And while these guys are always up to something, which usually involves stealing, when push comes to shove they'll do the right thing, and I love the way that they are written in the IDW Comics. But that's the history of the Babylonians and what they were like in ancient times, to even fast forwarding to now being the three great characters in Jet, Wave, and Storm. These three have always had a really special place in my heart from being in Sonic Riders, and I've always thought that they contrast Team Sonic super well with being one of their best rivals. And as teams, they're ultimately not that different. Sonic and Jet are the confident, sarcastic, brave leaders, Wave and Tails are the brains, and Knuckles and Storm are the more fighter-type knuckleheads. And I've always thought for being a spin-off game, Jet is a great rival to Sonic. It's hard to stack him up against the likes of Shadow or Metal, considering that they've both had numerous games to shine as a rival to Sonic or just as characters, but I really hope that Sega considers keeping them around a lot more after the release of Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. I don't think they need to pop up all the time by any means, but wouldn't it be cool as a side quest or a small role in a mainline game for the Rogues, or even just Jet pops up to mess with Sonic? or even just to help out. One of my biggest issues with Frontiers is while it was an amazing game, it felt as if the world was really empty at times. I'd love to see a Frontier-styled game potentially being the next mainline Sonic game where a bunch of Sonic characters are around and do different side quests or take part of the story in different ways, with some of those characters being the Babylon Rogues. But let me know how you guys feel about the Babylon Rogues in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say and what your guys' opinions are about the Babylon Rogues, and also let me know if you're going to be using them in Cross Worlds. But with that being said, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.